Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Bruce McDonald, and this is, in fact, the Talamanca Review. I don't know why my camera is not working here. Let me see if I can get something done about that. I don't know why that's not working. Holy spumole. What a strange and weird time. So much little friction to me just doing something as simple as broadcasting. Well, there's my cell phone. Let's see if I can get it off now. Okay. Holy spumole, why am I being given such a hard time these days, man? Everything I go to do is fraught somehow. Fraught, I tell you. Fraught. Okay, so, yeah. OBS virtual camera. Okay, there's the OBS virtual camera. I'm not gonna lie to you, this is kind of pissing me off a little bit here. Give me the iPhone, please. Give me the iPhone. Give me the iPhone. Let me just try it over here. Audio and video, OBS. Okay, I have no idea why this is doing this to me now. Well, there's always the backup camera. I suppose it's not the end of the world. There we go. That'll have to do for tonight. It's just a crappy little camera I have here. It's not my iPhone camera, but that's the best I can do tonight, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. Let's just take another look at that opening scene from Venezuela. Okay, so that's a pretty bizarre and strange scene to be watching, I'll tell you right now. And let me just get this camera over here. See how that works out for me. Okay, hang on a second. See how that works out for me. Man, this is amateur hour. Holy spumole. Sorry about this, folks. This is some Bush League broadcasting right here. I'll tell you that for nothing right now. All right, that's about as good as we're going to get it. So that's as good as this camera gets. So Venezuela had an election, and this is sort of my neck of the woods. I have what I would consider to be an almost expert opinion of this part of the world. And I'm fairly literate in the politics of Central and South America. More Central because that's where I live. That's the part of the continent I live on. North America, Central America, and South America. Of course, Costa Rica is in Central America. Listen, there's something that's been on my mind for a while. I never mentioned this on air. Um, but I think maybe it's time that I did. Okay? And this is a very unique boots on the ground insight that I don't think anybody else is going to be able to give you. Okay? Now, I don't know what to make of this. I don't even fully understand what it is that I'm saying. I understand the words and the message I'm passing on, but how it fits into the larger picture, I'm not quite sure I know. But here goes. So, for the last 6 months or so, we've been hearing a lot of stories about the Darien Gap. Okay, so Brett Weinstein went out there. Either Brett or Eric, I forget which one of the brothers is the evolutionary biologist and which one is the physicist. The one with the beard is the one I'm talking about. And that both these brothers have become darlings of the podcast set now. They're a couple smart Jewish brothers, American Jewish brothers. One's a physicist and the other is an evolutionary biologist, which is a curious thing to be an expert in, I suppose. But, you know, I don't really think evolution is a thing per se. Not the way they're selling it anyways. But look, I'm not current with the latest literature in the field, so maybe I should just reserve my opinion. But Darien Gap, been hearing a lot about this, right? What is Darien Gap? Well, it's the only stretch of land between Argentina and Alaska that doesn't have a stretch of Transamerica Highway on it. Highway of the Americas, it's called. There's a highway that goes all the way through. Okay? Not quite sure where it is exactly. Hang on a sec. Anyways, I was going to say I'm not quite sure where it is in Costa Rica. But I think it's really just a bunch of regional highways amalgamated into one name, right? But the Darien Gap is the only part that you can't drive. And that's where they say all the immigrants are coming. And that's where they say that, or the immigrants are passing through there, the Chinese, the Central Americans. But that's way, way south of where most of the immigrants have been coming from for the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. Most of them in the last 5 or 10 years have been Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Not so much El Salvador anymore since Bukele cleaned it up, but those were the countries. And those countries are north of me. Okay, so Central America goes, Panama is the first country at the southern end. The next is Costa Rica. The next is Nicaragua. The next after that, I believe, is El Salvador. Or the next after that is Honduras. The next after that is Guatemala. You got Belize over on the Pacific side, and then Belize and Guatemala share a border with Mexico. I think that's how it goes. I could have the order of Honduras and Guatemala mixed up. Okay? But that's basically Central America. So the Darien Gap narrative is Darien Gap is where Colombia and Panama join. So Colombia is at the southern border of Panama. The northern border of Panama is the border with Costa Rica. So there's one country between Costa Rica and Colombia, and that's Panama. Not a huge country either. I mean, I could probably sail to Colombia in like, I don't know, like half a day if I had good wind. If you look at a map, it's not that far at all to go from Costa Rica to Colombia, especially by water. But what I'm getting at here is the numbers that we've heard millions and millions of people passing through this Darien Gap. Well, I mean, I sat and I watched some of the news about Darien Gap, like Michael Yon, the ex-Green Beret, who's done a lot of reporting on the Darien Gap. Watched his coverage. I watched, the big podcasts that had the Weinstein brother on it, the bearded one, the evolutionary biologist. Now, he's the one I'm talking about because he and his wife went to Darien Gap and did some kind of like citizen reporting on it, I guess is what you would call it. And it was interesting, no doubt about it, very fascinating. But here's the thing. There's only two ways to get through Costa Rica. There's a highway on the Pacific side, and there's a highway on the Caribbean side, the Atlantic side. And the mountain that I live on is right off the highway that goes all the way up the Caribbean side. So this highway goes from Panama all the way through San Jose, all the way up to the Nicaragua border. Okay? Now here's the thing that I'm going to tell you. Those people, they're not moving through Costa Rica. If there were that many people moving through Costa Rica, it would be national news. And if it wasn't national news, meaning that the national news reporting was not talking about it, it would be street level news. All the pueblos would know. Pueblos are your communities, your barrio, the place you were born and raised, the place your family lived. There's no secrets in barrios. There's no secrets in pueblos. Everybody knows everything. Very, very intimate way of living the Latin American life. And it is a gossip factory. Latinos love to gossip. Okay? So what I'm getting at here is so let's say there's 48 people fill out a bus, like a Greyhound bus, with luggage, just for places for people to sit and everything. Your average bus seats 48 people. Okay? That's just the way it is. So I think it's like 12 rows of two. 12. Yeah, there's 12 rows of seats, 2 seats to a coupling, and 2 sides of the aisle. So that's 24 and 24 is 48. Okay, so let's just do the math here. If they were moving even 1,000 people a day through Costa Rica, now 1,000 people a day, 7 days a week, would be 365,000 people a year. But they're saying millions are ending up at that border. But let's just stay with 1,000 people a day. Okay? And let's round that 48, which fills a bus. Let's round that to 50 just to make the math easier. So 2 buses is 100 people. 20 buses is 1,000 people. That would mean there would have to be 20 buses a day moving all the way through Costa Rica. They would probably have a certain marking, meaning they would either be a Costa Rican company that had gotten the contract to move these people, or it would be United Nations equipment or some kind of NGO buses that were brought here for the task and go from the southern border to the northern border in Costa Rica, which would take about a day to drive. A day of daylight, like from 6 in the morning till probably 10 o'clock at night. I don't know if you could do the whole thing in one day. That's actually, I don't know. Probably. Depends on the traffic, though. But the point is, there's no way you could get 20 buses a day on this highway. And that's only if it's 1,000 people. 1,000 people a day. And those camps, when you look at the pictures from the Michael Yon videos and everything, those camps are holding tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Okay? Those NGO camps. You know, we've heard a lot of the stories about how they're being picked up at the U.S. border. There are busing services. That's all been reported on in the U.S. It's become the subject of much speculation, especially as it pertains to the groups or the NGOs, which are predominantly, according to Michael Yon and others, the NGOs responsible for refugees once inside the United States are Catholic Family Services and Jewish Family Services. Okay? And that's all been reported on. And there are hundreds of buses showing up at the border to cart those people off. There's minivans. It's like just coordinating the traffic just to move them is an operation in and of itself. That's how pronounced it is at the U.S. border. Why have I not heard anything about this in 2 years in Costa Rica? And if they're not going through Costa Rica, how are they getting from the Panama side of the Darien Gap up to the Mexican border? That becomes the question. So there's a lot of things going on down here in Latin America that even myself living in South Central America, I don't know the answers to these questions. I do not know. And I don't think anybody does, really. I don't think there are any answers to these questions. I don't think there are that many immigrants moving up. Okay, so 20 buses a day would be 1,000 people. Let's say 10,000 people would be 200 buses a day. And 10,000 people would still only be 3.6 million people per year, yeah. So there's your question. How are these people moving? What are they doing? How's it all getting done? Nobody seems to know the answer. Okay? Hang on a sec. Get my YouTube live control panel up. Yeah, let's get it going on. There we go. Open the studio. There we go. Studio open. Okay. Hey guys. Hi Jody. Evening. Just checking in on the chat now, guys. Got my shitty camera on tonight. I don't know what's going on with this iPhone camera or whether it's my Thunderbolt docking station. You just never know. Let me try one more time here. Oh, I think I got it. There we go. Back in the flesh. There's my Hollywood camera. Thank you very much. All right, we're back. That was, yeah, I just had to unplug it and replug it. Macs are as unpredictable as any computer. I'm telling you right now. I like it. Like, I'm not getting off the Mac system, but it can be a little cumbersome at times. Okay, so this is a wacky place, you know, Central America, and a lot can happen here, but I don't know if that can happen. Okay, so let's take a little bit more. Let's watch a big piece here from Redacted. Okay, so this is going to be one of the main informational bodies of tonight's show. And what did I call tonight's show? I called it Real Politik and Demons. Yeah, we'll get to that. Okay, so let's watch Redacted here. Hear what they have to say.
States if a civil war unfolds. And Elon Musk is even getting in on the action right now, pushing for a civil war. Journalist Anya Parampil from the Gray Zone just posted this on X a short time ago. I'll read it here. Quote, with zero knowledge of Venezuela, ex-influencers and MAGA conservatives are cheering on criminal gangs pushing for civil war in the country. Make no mistake, this is where their regime change fantasy will lead. Do people understand how disastrous this will be for Venezuela, the region, and the United States? Your leaders intentionally flooded your nation with desperate migrants before, and they're preparing to do it again. They want blood in Venezuela. Anya knows more about Venezuela than just about anyone in Western journalism. Her book is called Corporate Coup, the failed attempt to overthrow Venezuelan democracy, and specifically looked at the Trump administration's attempts at a coup. Now the Biden administration getting in on the action. Anya joins us now from the Gray Zone. Anya, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
My pleasure to be here, Clayton.
So you've been busy over the past 48 hours with all of what's descending into chaos in Venezuela. You know, a lot of people feel like are being played like a fiddle right now if they're watching corporate media. I, too, have seen like a lot of conservatives on social media posting about Venezuela, and they clearly are either being played or they're being willfully ignorant about what's going on here. What is your assessment of it?
I think we have various competing interests here. I think, you know, I've been a fan of Elon Musk and his way of operating X up to this point. I do genuinely feel that it's been a better platform for free speech, and that the war in Gaza would not have been the same. We would have not seen it the same way in the West if not for what he allowed on X. That doesn't mean that he himself is perfect. And in this particular instance, he's decided to openly side with Maria Corina Machado, a figure that has received U.S. funding since the early 2000s, since 2002, 2003, when Chavez first took power. She was one of the leading so-called civil society activists receiving State Department funding in order to overthrow Chavismo and the Venezuelan government. She's still around in 2024, but she wasn't on the ballot this time. She was basically the muscle behind the campaign of Edmundo Gonzalez, who was a former functionary in the pre-revolution days of Venezuela. He worked in El Salvador and Venezuela's ministry there when the United States was partnering with Venezuela to run a dirty war in El Salvador and neighboring Nicaragua. So I'm willing to bet he worked closely with Trump Venezuela envoy Elliot Abrams, who was later convicted for his role of criminality in the region over Iran-Contra, and is still advising the Biden administration today on Latin America. That's the candidate you have that Elon has thrown his weight behind, because for some reason in Latin America, and I'm guessing it has to do with natural resource wealth, he has decided to side with Javier Milei, a figure in Argentina that is very pro-United States, pro-IMF. He's sometimes labeled as a libertarian, but I don't think any libertarian Argentine would be pegging their currency to the US dollar and being so dependent on foreign banksters in order to fund their economy. That Elon and others would like to see take rolled out in Venezuela under Edmundo Gonzalez. And that was the program in Venezuela before Chavez, all throughout Venezuela's history since the discovery of oil there in the 1920s. And then on the US political side, the MAGA conservatives, that I give them credit, being very brave on Ukraine and standing up to US intervention in Europe. Unfortunately, I feel they're beholden to a foreign lobby here in the United States, just as we have the Israel lobby, which is, you know, reigns supreme. We also have a very powerful expat community of Venezuelans and Cubans in Florida, which is a state that any US presidential candidate seeks to win, and they play outsized influence here. They would like to use US taxpayer money, and if it came down to it, US troops in blood to return themselves to power in Venezuela. And unfortunately, too many US political figures, even those that claim to put America first, fall for this line because they hear the word socialism and pretty much fall apart.
That's right. So over the past few days, all we've been hearing from these voices is it's a socialist country. And clearly there are problems with this election, and America needs to stand for the people of Venezuela. And they do not want to have a socialist government in charge. And we need to stand with the people who are taking to the streets. But it's clearly they're clearly conflating two things here, and it seems like they're fabricating an entire story in order to carry out their narrative, are they not?
There are a couple points to look at here. First of all, I see a lot of people online pointing to a last-minute jump in support for Maduro that came in with the polls and comparing it to what happened in the United States during Stop the Steal, when there was like a 3-day pause in counting, and suddenly, you know, I went to bed on election night in 2020 thinking that Trump had won re-election, and then 3 days later the result changed. That is not what happened in Venezuela. And first of all, because their elections are much easier to audit. You need an electric fingerprint scan and a physical ID in order to activate your ballot in Venezuela. You are then
Imagine that.
I know, right? And they're
Right.
actually proud of that. When I go to Venezuela, they're proud that they have voter ID laws that they say that makes their country safer, more secure. But for some reason, people here can't get them, according to Democrats. Uh,
Right.
so you have that, and then you get a physical receipt of your ballot, which you carry into an on-site secure box, sign your name again to affirm that you oversaw that ballot drop-off. That physical ballot receipt, 54% of those ballots are automatically audited against the electric result tally in these polling sites after the vote is counted, in order to assuage fears that the digital or electronic vote was tampered with. And so the opposition claims that they won some of these polling sites that the government claimed Maduro won. The National Election Council should be able to put those rumors to bed by releasing the polling data, and we can get that anytime. We should be getting that anytime soon now. But the other point is, a few years ago, you may remember in Bolivia, that same line was rolled out, that there was a last minute jump in support for Evo Morales. And that's why the election that he won in 2019, I believe, or 2020, I'm sorry, was fraudulent. But what we have to keep in mind about countries like Venezuela and Bolivia is that they don't actually operate like the United States. They have extremely rural areas where in some cases the vote count does come in very late, and those happen to typically be bastions of support for the progressive or sovereign government. In this case, Maduro, and in Bolivia's case, Evo Morales. And so at the time in Bolivia, the OAS and outside powers were able to use that last minute spike in voting in order to carry out a coup. And that was later, even the New York Times admitted that no, that polling data was correct. It just had to do with votes coming in late. That could be the case coming here in Venezuela. But even if we're not going to get into the nitty gritty discussion of vote and who won the election, the reality is that right now there are armed gangs shutting down streets in Venezuela, firing at troops. Okay, at least 20 Venezuelan soldiers have been injured in the past 24 hours because armed gangs are roaming the streets attempting to overthrow the government. Okay, this is what the Democratic Party freaked out about on January 6th, when they had a shaman walking through the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., and acted like that was a violent insurrection to overthrow the U.S. government, when the police were there pretty much opening the doors for protesters to go inside. That is not what is happening in Venezuela. Can you imagine if MAGA had armed themselves, had shot U.S. troops, National Guard troops, and police, and put up barricades in the street around the White House to violently force the overthrow of the sitting government? That I don't even want to know what would happen in the U.S. if that took place. And so the fact that that's happening in Venezuela right now, and that's what you have people cheering on, is very concerning, because the military has faced many tests of its loyalty to Maduro over the past decade, and they've never switched, even when the U.S. military was on the Colombian border threatening to invade. So I highly doubt the Venezuelan military is going to throw their weight behind these opposition figures now. And so if this violence escalates, what we're looking at is a civil war in our hemisphere. We're complaining about Venezuelan migrants now in the United States. How do we think it's going to look if there is a civil war in that country?
Right. Destabilizing countries is the number one cause. You know, when people want to complain about illegal immigrants in the United States, they never talk about the cause of it. They talk about the symptoms, right? So we go in and destabilize these Latin American countries, and then these flood of immigrants pour into the United States, and we complain about it. If you look where it starts, it's starting right here with this U.S.-backed color revolution happening in Venezuela. I guess I'll get you out of here on this, which is, you kind of touched on the oil point of this earlier, but when people say, well, why would the U.S. government want to do this? Why would they want to overthrow Maduro? They're using the socialist argument, but you mentioned oil at the heart of it. Is that what we're really looking at here, is oil and resources, the overthrowing of this government so that the United States can control its oil resources?
Yeah, that's a very key point here. When we talk about socialism, Venezuela's economy, and this is something I emphasize in the book, is vastly controlled by the private sector. Its government and the public sector are only responsible for controlling about 15 to 20% of the economy. That's not so different actually from statistics here in the United States. The difference is what's privatized, what's socialized in Venezuela are their oil reserves, are there gold deposits, are there vast mineral reserves. And what we're talking about here are oil reserves over double the amount that Saudi Arabia has. Venezuela has by far the largest oil reserves in the world and the largest untapped gold deposits in the world. So let's think about that. The world is changing. Russia, China, the BRICS nations are establishing a world, a financial system that is going to be less dependent on the US dollar. That's already very clear. And I'm willing to bet gold is going to play a role in that future economy. So Venezuela, I believe, will probably be invited to join BRICS this year in Russia. And the United States would much rather that gold and that oil be under the command of not Venezuelan companies doing business with US companies, but US companies, period. And that's the difference here. Venezuela, before the revolution, was a free-for-all for the foreign corporate US and European companies to exploit the oil and all of the reserves. The IMF came there and dictated their domestic policy, didn't allow them to develop a national industry capacity. So they were very heavily dependent on oil or imports for basic goods and exporting their oil. Well, Venezuela's tried to reverse that, tried to develop their own ability to build their own products, not be so dependent on imports, but that takes time. In the meantime, the US has imposed these sanctions and attempted to strangle their economy because they're so dependent on these imports, but it's not working. Russia and these other countries have stepped in to support Venezuela. They were able to survive, even able to possibly, Maduro, according to polls, did, even before the vote took place, have a good chance at winning this election. I don't think Americans in Washington, the people running the policy here, can really wrap their heads around the fact that he's managed to survive. And because they thought the Guaido coup or any just little push that they give would result in the collapse of his government. And the fact that it stayed this long tells me that it comes down to the military. And I don't think we want to fight a war against the Venezuelan military, not a dirty war, not a direct war. The Russian military is present in Venezuela. They have advisors. They care about their ally there. They're not going to let it go. So I would hate for World War III to come to the US continent, or to the American continent, rather.
Yeah, and Vladimir Putin.
Holy cow, has my mic been off this whole time? Sorry guys, I do apologize for that. Okay. So that's the situation in Venezuela. And it's a very interesting place for us to study, and I think it's a place that our attention should go, and I'll tell you why. It's part of our landmass. It's part of the Americas. Okay? And it's very bad form for a world empire power to not have control of its hemisphere, let's say, its immediate physical range of influence. There shouldn't be anybody disagreeing with the way things are done, which is why, by the way, Cuba was such a thorn in the side of the United States for so many decades, just because it just flagrantly just sat out there, this relatively small island nation in the Caribbean that just stuck both middle fingers up to the United States for 5 decades, and largely still doing it today. Okay? Now, Venezuela is important for a number of reasons. Venezuela was an extremely affluent country a number of years ago. Affluent to a kind of affluence most North Americans in 2024 under the age of 30 would find affluent. They would find it very affluent. The amount of work you have to do, the living conditions, the quality of the food, the culture, the disposable income, was an affluent society. Their great error, or their great targeting, hang on a second. Excuse me. The thing that puts a target on their back is their resources. Okay? Because they're so resource rich, they're going to attract a lot of attention. And one country like Venezuela could dramatically shift the entire political landscape of the entire continent of America. I know that sounds a bit cynical, and I know that sounds a bit, I guess some people might say I'm being, tolerant toward the reality of realpolitik as it's been given to us by the Council on Foreign Relations for 5 decades now. But, even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And on this issue, they are right. You cannot have this much discord in your own region. You can't have an economic powerhouse with those kinds of resources going under the control of a system outside the IMF. Now, what's extremely disturbing about what's going on now is, first of all, everything is escalating. Okay, and this is intentional as well. There's no commander-in-chief. There was a cognitively impaired commander-in-chief in the form of Joe Biden, but he's formally stepped out of the picture now. He is no longer governing. The acting president of the United States of America is Kamala Harris right now, as per the law of the United States. When the president is no longer capable of ruling for that period of time remaining in his or her term until the next election, the vice president is the acting president-elect. So in a sense, Kamala Harris is already the first female president of the United States. It happened in a similar fashion in Canada with a woman named Kim Campbell, who kind of accidentally became Prime Minister of Canada from the Deputy Prime Minister position. And that's how the first female Prime Minister happened in Canada. It was a procedural thing. And the same thing is going on with Kamala Harris. Okay? I don't think they're going to flip her, which I think is completely insane. So they're going to completely double down on their insane woke agenda to try to win the vote. They're not backing off. They're not going to compete with the Republicans on the bread and butter issue like economy, inflation, security, the basics of governance, the things that people actually do need a government to do. Okay? Which the Biden government has not been doing, and which the Trudeau government has not been doing in Canada. These are anti-governments. And by anti-government, I mean that the implied agenda, and the implied agenda is what you can deduce about what their real agenda is by their actions, and specifically by their spending, where they spend money. And both Trudeau and Biden have spent exorbitant amounts of money outside the borders of their respective countries, Canada and the United States. Massive amounts of money being spent outside the borders. And internal spending is going to non-citizens. In both instances, Canada and the United States. Copious amounts of money from the Treasury are going to facilitate the placement and stabilization of literally millions of immigrants in both countries, Canada and the United States. So this tells us clearly that there's already an international operation afoot, and that aspects of our governments, both the Canadian and the American governments, the United States government, are in compliance with this global agenda, are assisting it, are lending domestic national resources in the forms of the Treasury and various departments in the U.S., and in terms of the Treasury and various ministries in Canada. So time, civil servants, money, and other resources like living arrangements are being paid for by the citizens. Exorbitant costs at a time when both countries are facing what ostensibly looks like bankruptcy to anybody who has an eye for what we could call solvency. It's bankruptcy. And yet they continue to spend as though it's 1972 and there's no national debt. What sense does any of this make if you're truly trying to build an economy and build a country? So we don't have any leaders, okay? So let's swing back to Venezuela, okay? My point was there's no commander-in-chief right now. This guy is essentially, we can say that Kamala Harris is the first female president, the first black president, the first Asian president. There's Cami Harris is a lot of check boxes. Okay, it's like a woke revolution, you know. Kamala Harris. Look at what we've achieved in the United States. A woman of color is running the country, which would be a great headline if she could actually run the country. It's not like, I don't want you to think for a second I'm against that headline. I'm not. I think it would be a wonderful thing for people of color and for women to see that and to have that example. But this isn't it. And that's another dimension to this. Like, what does this do to, like, you know, super smart 16-year-old, 18-year-old young women who are super ambitious, top of their classes, you know, basically the grown-up Lisa Simpsons, when they look at this phony feminism, this complete lack of meritocracy, justified, of course, because if you don't take it, the man ain't going to give it to you, and the man's always white. See, you're just taking it from the man. Just take it from him. That's the way you got to do it, girls, because it'll never be given to you on merit. I don't know. Margaret Thatcher did an okay job. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of her policies. You know, the British Reagan, it didn't go over as well over in Britain, but nobody would ever say she was incompetent. She actually did the job. She was qualified, right? So it's not about gender. Anyways, this is the guy leading you now. Okay? Here he is.
If my colleagues will indulge me for just 1 minute, I want to speak quickly to the elections that just took place in Venezuela. We applaud the Venezuelan people for their participation in the July 28th presidential election. We commend their courage and commitment to democracy in the face of repression and in the face of adversity. We've seen the announcement just a short while ago by the Venezuelan Electoral Commission. We have serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. It's critical that every vote be counted fairly and transparently, that election officials immediately share information with the opposition and independent observers without delay, and that the electoral authorities publish the detailed tabulation of votes. The international community is watching this very closely and will respond accordingly.
Okay. So you remember what the long interview I played, the lady from Redacted who wrote the book, who's married to the guy from the Gray Zone, as Jody pointed out. Russian military in Venezuela advising the Venezuelan military. And where Russia is these days, I would say it's fair to say that they're probably in some measure backed up by China. And if that creepy visit to North Korea is any indication, probably North Korea as well. Okay? So, largest gold deposits in the world right now, large untapped gold deposits, some of, if not the largest gold reserves in the world now, waiting to be dug up. Venezuela. And oil reserves in excess of almost double the amount of what Saudi Arabia has. Okay? So you see how they live in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi royal family and the Saudis. So that's how rich Venezuela is. Why are those people starving on the streets? Who's telling the truth? Have the communists ruined the economy? I think what that woman said, the writer, is true. That the government controls maybe 15 or 20% of the economy and it's all public resources. If that's true, I think it's brilliant. I'll bet you there's little or no income tax and the social programs are very well funded. But that's not the kind of government that we're spreading. We're spreading something more along the lines of only the strong survive. You know, our economy is more like gladiator school. And you heard what she said. I mean, they want American companies in there running the oil. But the only reason the American companies aren't there now is we took issue with the governance in there. As to who won the election and whether or not there was any fraud, I don't know. I would say you heard what the lady said. It's very, very difficult to commit fraud. Because to vote in Venezuela, you need your fingerprint and your ID. They have voter registration and voter identification machines by fingerprint in Venezuela. Okay? Now I want you to consider something else. Very many of the immigrants who slipped over the southern border in the United States are Venezuelan. There's allegedly 700,000 Venezuelans in Chicago alone. Isn't that interesting? I find it interesting. Let me just check something here. Population of Venezuela. 28.3 million people as of 2022. You see, the Central American countries are not heavily populated. Like all of Central America, I don't think has 28 million people. I don't know. Panama might have 7. They have 5 here. Yeah. So that's a lot of people. 28 million people in Venezuela. That's a lot more people who could find their way up to the United States of America quite easily. Quite easily indeed. Okay? So, why are they saying that Maduro's forces are going to kill people? Let's listen to this dude, okay? It's in Spanish, but it's only a couple minutes, and then I'll give you the translation when he's done.
Esta información es de suma urgencia. Me ha llegado información de que el régimen asesino de Nicolás Maduro ha dado órdenes de masacrar al pueblo venezolano y que va a cortar el internet para que las personas no puedan grabar esto ya. Hay imágenes de los colectivos chavistas disparando en la avenida Urdaneta a personas que querían ir a manifestarse al Palacio de Miraflores en contra de este fraude electoral masivo que ha cometido el régimen asesino narcotraficante de Nicolás Maduro Moros. A los militares les pido desconocer órdenes que violen y menoscaben los derechos humanos basados en el artículo 333 y 350 de la Constitución. Es hora de rebelarse y desobedecer órdenes para masacrar al pueblo venezolano. A los venezolanos, de a pie es hora de la legítima defensa, basta ya de dar la otra mejilla. Y al señor Elon Musk le pido que libere los satélites de Starlink para Venezuela, ya que Maduro quiere cortar el internet para masacrar a los venezolanos. Es por eso que ha cortado relaciones con 7 países del mundo libre. Es hora de rebelarse, es hora de sublevarse, es hora de la rebelión cívico-militar para decirle no al ilegítimo, al usurpador Nicolás Maduro Moros. Venezolanos, militares venezolanos y policías venezolanos, rebélense en masa. No hay manera, no hay forma posible de que Nicolás Maduro Moros pueda controlar Venezuela con lo que viene. Viene la libertad de Venezuela. La gente ha salido autoconvocada. La gente está tumbando imágenes de Maduro y de Hugo Chávez. La gente se cansó. Con dirigencia o sin dirigencia, la gente está saliendo espontáneamente a decirle no a la dictadura. ¡Viva Venezuela libre! ¡Viva la libertad! ¡Viva la rebelión cívico-militar! Y abajo, la tiranía de Nicolás Maduro. Ha llegado tu fin. Venezuela será libre. A las calles, Venezuela. Calles sin retorno hasta derrocar al régimen de Maduro.
So he's kind of a motivator. He's trying to get people out onto the streets. So that would be passing around on WhatsApp. Understand the full impact of this technology that we've given people. You know, I always have to remind myself of this, okay? We here are people who generally podcast and broadcast outside of officialdom, editors, anybody to contradict our opinions, okay? We generally can sometimes err on the gloomy side and forget that there's this divine equity in everything, meaning the scales have to balance. So as dark as things get, it has to be counterbalanced with light, because that's how things stay in balance, right? Think of the scales of justice. This reality between negative and positive has to stay in balance. It has to. Okay, so cycles of extreme depravity that go into a hellish depravity, they would bottom out, and then we would regrow within true love again. Okay, that would be like a scarification of sorts. So, but generally speaking, in fact, not even generally speaking, absolutely speaking, everything sort of has to balance out. It's just the way things work, right? So as we go through these situations now, you have to realize that in the framework of realpolitik, nothing can stop these things now, because they're all being run from the subsystems. So the subsystems are money. Okay, so what's going on in Venezuela and the American response to it, and probably the American incitement to street violence, because I think Maduro is legitimately running the country. I think the people want him there. Does he have socialist leanings? Does he use public resources for the betterment of the public of Venezuela? Yeah, he does. You know, and there's all kinds of brilliant models that can work. We don't have to be so corporate puritanical the way we do capitalism in North America, especially America. You know, I always give the example of, you know, Taiwan when I lived there, and how the government made most of its money through a monopoly on tobacco and beer. Taiwan beer and Taiwan cigarettes. And with those two vices, they were pretty much able to fund the entire government. And now you could say, well, hey man, what about all the hard-working families that got into the tobacco business, Bruce? Are you going to take Marlboro away from whoever runs Marlboro? Give it to the government? Are you going to take Bud and Bud Light from Anheuser-Busch and turn it over? I don't think too many people would complain, actually. I think it's pretty hard to screw up a lager, a Pilsner these days. I think anybody can brew a decent Pilsner. That's what people drink. They drink lagers for the most part. So if you went to a national beer, you could probably cut the income tax in the United States by about 70%. I'm not even joking. I mean, this sounds funny. You're waiting for me to crack a smile and go, I'm not kidding. I mean, when you think about how much money is probably spent in the United States on beer, okay? Just think about it. I mean, it's got to be like, I don't know. Like, let's say there's 100 million people who drink beer in the United States, and each of them spends $2,000 a year on beer, whether it be a case of beer to go to the cottage, or a couple pints after work, or, you know, $2,000 a year on beer is not that much. And I have buddies in Toronto who drink $1,500 a month, every month. You know, their bar tab is like their rent at the end of the month. I'm not joking. This is the way, believe it or not, those movies you've seen about the Irish in South Boston and the Scots aren't much better. They're like, a lot of my friends drink. A lot of my Scottish and Irish friends, they drink, and drinking is like a lifestyle. Anyways, my point is, there's got to be hundreds of billions of dollars just in that. Okay? Throw cigarettes into the mix? I mean, come on. Anyways, the point is the American companies want the resources, and they're not going to give them to China, and they're not going to give them to Russia. And in this particular instance, I'm with the Western governments, because I don't think China or Russia are going to be any more favorable to Venezuela than the United States. One form of corporate raiding is the same as another. Doesn't matter whether the corporation doing the raiding in combination with the Department of Defense and the Department of Treasury lifting sanctions on Venezuela, or the corporation is the entity we know as, the Republic of Russia, or, the People's Republic of China, right? They're just corporations. It's the same thing. They're just, but I think we should be hemispherically conscious now. If I were a leader of Canada now, I would be looking at the American continent and be looking to shore up economic relationships with my land-based neighbors. That's what I'd be doing. Okay, Mexico, all of these sorts of places. But what do I know? I'm just some guy. Now, the last thing I want to do tonight is I just want to read a Substack. It's very short. It'll only take me 5 minutes to read. Some of you might know the guy. His name is Thomas Sheridan. And he wrote a book. I forget the exact title, The Curious World of the Psychopath or something like that. A number of years ago. He became quite famous, and he's a bit of a blogger and a man about town now in the circles that we read and study and pay attention to. If you're watching me, you're probably aware of who Thomas Sheridan is. But this popped up in my feed today, and he's got a very interesting take on demons, and because I wrote The Devil in Us, I thought I'd share this with you. So the headline is, Kamala Harris is here to open the gates to the demon world and keep them opened. And I can even tell you the demon which she is hosting. That's the subtitle. Thomas Sheridan, July 25th, 2024. The Babbler from the Abyss is his Substack. The army of Corazon has already laid the groundwork for the most dangerous of all demons to take the ultimate throne. Hyperbole, sensationalism, clickbait. These are probably all the terms running through your mind when reading the headline of this article. And that's okay. There were also plenty of people who perished in the Holocaust thinking Hitler wasn't so bad, and the many Russian communists who still personally expected to enjoy the fruits of the Bolshevik Revolution as they were being led into the NKVD killing rooms. So off you go, back to Love Island, or whatever keeps you from looking into the nature of this present and shattered reality. Demons are real. My friends, you are living in a world saturated with demons and demonically possessed individuals. I agree with them, and I applaud them for the courage to say this out loud. It's not a topic most people can say out, not a line most people could say out loud. Be serious and be taken seriously. So my hat's off to Tom Sheridan here for this article. My friends, you are living in a world saturated with demons and demonically possessed individuals. They are called the woke these days, and they are no longer humans, as you or I are. Transformed into becoming easy hosts for walk-ins by the present education and media system, they are now far beyond that of hyper-egregor generated by a failing Western civilization. You guys remember what an egregor was, right? If those of you who go right back to McDonald in the Morning with me, I did a whole show on egregors when I was going through the Martinist material. I don't want to redo it tonight. I don't have time. They are an invading army of lesser demons encouraged by everything from identity politics to artificial intelligence, and who had long coveted and desired this mortal realm for themselves. Every, and I mean every culture on this planet has kept itself vigilant from these supernatural and spiritual invaders. Enormous cannons of protective rituals, shamanism, folkloric talismans, and incantations were developed by all cultures over thousands of years to keep them at bay. However, within Western society today, they've crossed the abyss and they're finally invading our domain en masse. What an incredibly ballsy thing to say. A psychotic and mediocre establishment in the West, overseen by a senile U.S. president, was not enough to allow the full invasion to take place. Yet they needed one of their own finally sequestered in the White House. And Kamala Harris is that host. She is demonstrating all the classic traits of the super demon Choronzon. Well, what is Choronzon? Well, he's called the babbler in the abyss, an entity that says nothing of any value, and its communication process is entirely gaslighting and babbling. Words that are just words and mean nothing. It cackles and taunts from the abyss. The purpose is to generate confusion and madness as a weapon of control and domination. Choronzon is a complex and multifaceted entity that appears in various occult and esoteric traditions. In the hands of a skilled occultist, Choronzon can be used as the ultimate spiritual challenge. However, spiritually the power is akin to plutonium. Magical practitioners have had to be committed to killing themselves if the conjuration rite becomes unstable, as the final means to save their souls. In Enochian magic, a system developed by John Dee and Edward Kelly in the late 16th century, Choronzon is known as the demon of the abyss, and he is considered a chaotic and disruptive entity that dwells in the abyss, a metaphysical void separating the human realm from higher spiritual realms. Crossing the abyss is seen as a critical and dangerous step in an occultist's spiritual ascent. Aleister Crowley depicted Choronzon as a demon of dispersion and confusion, the final obstacle embodying illusion, confusion, and the fracturing of unity. Choronzon is associated with the number 333, which is seen as a symbol of division and fragmentation, obliteration of all human stability as well as psychic and spiritual integration. The Hindus have their own version, as do all the native tribes of this world. It is the name, the same Lord of chaos, confusion, and cancer. It has broken through and wants to sit in the Oval Office. What a profoundly powerful little piece there from our friend Thomas Sheridan. I don't know what to make of that, truly I don't. There is a fracturing of the individual. There is, I would say, a penetration of the individual in our world, in our time. I think we live in a time where spiritual practice is a martial art. That's what I think of the time we live in now. I think that if you're not doing some form of spiritual practice, you're in a lot of trouble. In fact, I don't have any idea how you could even defend yourself against what's out there now. let alone what's coming. Very interesting time to be alive. Very interesting time to be alive. All right. That's it for tonight, folks. We'll be back. I will get back to a little Stardust Ranch, but I find the world so engaging now that I don't know. You know, I can't look away. It's like a car crash. So I guess this is how we all go through the abyss together to get to the higher spiritual regions. Is that the abyss is going to manifest in the world, and we're going to have to go through it or die. So we're going to go through it. And this is, I guess, the path. I guess it was always this way. It's a little discouraging, you know. I mean, I don't really want to see this much instability in my hemisphere, in the American continent. That kind of stuff spreads pretty easy too, right? I don't know what this place would be like under anybody else's rule. You know, Russia or China, or I don't know what that would do to Central America. I don't know how Central America would get along with that. I don't know. We'll see. I'm Bruce McDonald.